Welcome to Vantage Point. I'm Marcia Boyles, and as usual, I'm joined by my co-host and co-producer, Kathleen Taylor, who is our clinical social worker at the Medical Center. Hi, Kathleen.
Hello.
I'm also just delighted to introduce our guest today, Sandy Grundeman. Sandy is a fellow resident, and her background is speech pathology, which has pertinence, I think, to today's topic. Would you agree, Sandy?
Yep, probably so.
All right. Well, today's topic is stress, and before I introduce the topic and we get into that whole issue, I think we also should acknowledge, Kathleen, that we have not done a live program since November.
That's right. That's right.
It's been a long hiatus. We in the absence of live programs, we did show a couple of our favorite repeats, but it's been quite a while.
Yeah. Well, welcome back. That's
Thank you.
for sure. Back to the table.
Back to the table, literally.
Yeah.
I should probably make some explanation of where I've been. I haven't been, out partying for the last 4 months.
Sadly, yeah.
Sadly, yeah, exactly. Wish that were the case. I very suddenly, in 24 hours, developed a neurological situation that is improving, but had very nearly paralyzed me, literally. I haven't been able to walk, have very limited other movement, and have been in Garden Ridge and hospitalization since December, the week before Christmas. So it has been a long journey. Now, I should say that I am improving literally weekly, and am leaving Garden Ridge, I hope, fairly soon, in a matter of a few weeks, I think, probably. So that's my update. So if I look a little different and sound a little different, that's the cause of it.
And you've become an expert in stress.
I can certainly relate.
You can relate to a lot of these topics.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
In a very different way than when we started this topic.
Not just academically, huh?
Not academic at all. I should remind folks that this is the second program we've had on stress. Back in November, we started on stress, and Sandy was with us at that point. We got through the beginning of the topic, and I'm going to go through that just very quickly. I think we also should probably reiterate the fact that we're talking about long-term stress here, that stress has really two phases. There's short-term stress, the fight or flight kind of stress, that is, if a train is coming down the tracks toward you and you have to jump out of the way, kind of situation that is immediate, and the adrenaline begins to flow and you have super energy. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about long-term stress.
More chronic.
Chronic stress.
As opposed to acute.
That's, of course, exactly right. And Kathleen, you'll talk a bit about the damaging effects of long-term stress at some point in this conversation. Now, Sandy and I together did a resident survey, a totally unscientific, totally unscientific survey. I did it by email, and I think you did it with some of your groups.
Right, I had them write. I had a little questionnaire that I gave some folks.
Okay. We got approximately 35 responses. So again, this is our friends and folks in your activity groups,
right,
that responded to this. Now, we broke this into 3 different phases of stress. We started with the causes of my own stress. And we're talking about residents now, causes of my stress. And I'll talk about that. And then we're going to be talking about reactions to stress. And Kathleen is going to be talking about that. And Sandy, we're going to finish up with you talking about the resident responses in our survey to ways they folks relieve their stress. Okay, that having been said, let me start then with the causes of individual stress. It will not surprise anybody that the main one I heard was it's the politics of the day and the divisiveness that that's creating even among residents in terms of you're a Democrat, I'm a Republican kind of thing. Technology was another one. We all know, all of us who use computers and even TVs, what it's like when they don't work right. It's just extremely frustrating. Another primary cause of stress was relationship difficulties, sometimes with family, certainly with friends here at Green Spring as well. Another one to which I can clearly relate very, very closely is my health issues and those of my children, those of my family, and sometimes those of our friends. Often is a stressor. An overload of commitments to various activities. One of the residents said, my head says no, no, and my mouth says, oh, of course I'd love to do it, which I thought was cute. Sometimes my inability to cope with things is a stressor. And the last one is, I thought, the most succinct way of putting what many folks are experiencing, many of us experiencing, and that is my main stressor is not being the person I used to be.
And not being able to do the things I used to
Exactly,
do.
and all the ramifications of that.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you know how much I like themes and patterns. So I'm looking at this list of things, and I think kind of the overarching category is how we adjust to changes in our life. So it can be physical changes, it can be what's going on in the environment, it can be what changes happen in our relationships. So I think stress is related to change and how we are able to adjust to it.
I would never have thought of it that way.
And so, resiliency, I talk about resiliency all the time, is the flexibility that we have to be able to adjust our reactions when we're challenged by a change in our life, to be able to adapt constructively. So the negative effects, and I've also talked about the fact that there's positive stress and negative or distress, and that has to do with whether we perceive the change as something that we can grow from, learn from, stretches us in some kind of positive way, versus the
Does it open new opportunities?
right versus the distress, which just feels like overwhelming, not able to cope, that sort of thing.
Can't do it.
Yeah. So I sort of like to frame it that way because I think it makes sense.
Well,
it's not
as-
just, the list would be endless.
Yeah.
So that's why we want to just sort of give the broad category of like what happens when you are confronted with change? What happens when you have something physical happens that you have to adjust your life around?
Well, as you have certainly pointed out on other occasions, life has changed. Nothing stays the same.
That's right.
And I think we're mostly finding that old age has more changes than we were used to in the past, but maybe that's, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if
That might be a perception.
That's
think
just what I'm
so.
thinking.
Yeah, yeah. Perception of stress. We'll talk about that some too, in terms of how people perceive their lives. Some people can have lives that sort of to another person, an outsider looks perfect, and they're experiencing all kinds of internal stress, and vice versa. Somebody can have a lot of things going on that that looks hard, but they're responding well. So it really is how the individual responds to a certain extent, what their skill set is to be able to do that.
Coping. We had a couple of residents who actually said, "Oh, I don't have any stress," which just shocked
you.
Yes, absolutely. It's hard to believe.
Yeah, and I think your automatic reaction is to go, "Oh, they're denying. they're not really seeing what's going on." But I think that some people are able to have framed their lives in a way that it doesn't, whatever's going on doesn't feel stressful to them.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think they were being truthful. Absolutely, and they do. The two that I'm thinking of are excellent copers, and they're healthy and amazing. All right, well, that puts it, I think, in perspective. I like that. All right, you're now going to talk about signs of stress.
Right, right. So what we're going to be talking about with signs of stress, and these are situations that were identified by the people that responded to your survey. But they do also fall into some categories that I can talk about. But this is when people are not necessarily adapting so well. They're having trouble adjusting to the stressors that they're under, that you might see some of these problems arising. First one, can't focus, concentrate, have trouble thinking clearly, make stupid mistakes. And that really has to do with what stress does to your cognitive functioning. And we see people that seem to present with short-term memory loss, for example, which when you kind of start to get a little bit more information about them, it's because they're experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety. And what the stress reaction does, which we've talked about before, is that it cuts you off from your prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking brain, and puts you into your, and I've said this a million times, so it's silly, but I like it, is the lizard brain. It's the reactive survival mode brain. So you're not using your critical thinking, you're responding reactively. And so as a result, you're not able to collect information, process information, use information to be able to help you think your way out of a problem, because you're not really thinking at that point, you're just reacting. Another thing that a person said, my life is not going smoothly.
Yes.
So I think that, that sort of speaks more to the emotional part of stress, that you just sort of feel out of control, that you don't have the ability.
Well, it also would be the cognitive part. If you're not thinking straight and you're not coping emotionally, gosh, that's a deadly combination.
Yeah, it can be. If you feel like I think it all fits together, in kind of a perfect storm sometimes of not being able to manage, because, if you don't feel like you can control things because you can't kind of think your way through, then emotionally that's going to be distressful as well. Physical signs, I think sometimes those are the first signs that we would like people to be aware of, is just how you start to experience tension in your body. You might be more irritable. You might be, sleeplessness is a key one, that you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't go back to sleep because your mind is just sort of churning. Things are, you're trying to sort things out in your brain, you're worrying.
Headaches.
Headaches is one, all kinds of physical problems. A lot of stomach distress people will find, aching body in general. So I think that that's something that people, when they start to experience stress, you usually can have people tell you where they feel their stress, and everybody has their place, so it's usually, a lot of times it's shoulders, neck, where we kind of like start finding our shoulders up around our ears. That's never a good sign. But anyhow, those are things that people can be aware of.
I know somebody describes as that knot in my stomach, that you feel it, just the tension.
Right. Yeah, I mean, some people that are more tend to be very aware somatically will be able to point to the place. I feel it here, I feel it here, I feel it here,
Yeah.
But it's, clearly your body takes on the stress, and it might not be something that you necessarily are aware of, but it's absorbing it nonetheless.
I know there's one other one that I don't see on our list here, but I know we talked about, was sometimes we get crabby or out of sorts. That's the way it manifests itself, because we can't cope with it, and so we just get angry, basically, or
I know what you're talking about. That's a really good point, and it's a really interesting phenomenon, because it has to do with stress. So when you're under stress, that really has to do with perceiving threat in your environment. And so how you're responding to threat is that you feel like you have to be hypervigilant. You have to be paying attention all the time to what's going on. So you become hypersensitive to your environment and to sensory input in particular. So all of a sudden you're like a raw nerve. You get very irritable. Loud noises might startle you. Somebody, how somebody eats their food at the dining room table might just totally throw you off. You just become really sensitized to things, and you become irritable and short-tempered and all of that stuff too.
Yeah, it is. That's definitely true. Yeah. I get very short with folks.
And they all flow together too, because if you're not getting good sleep, then you start out the day, kind of not in a good mood, irritable.
Yeah. There's fatigue
when you're
involved.
tired.
Yeah.
You don't.
Don't have the energy.
And I hadn't thought about it as a hyper vigilance state, but
No,
I mean, you can certainly see why your muscles are.
Yeah, you're still primed. It's that fight or flight thing. Sort of, you're primed to do something, but you're not doing anything. You're not going to run.
Can't run from most of the issues.
And then I don't have any stress, folks, which is great.
Yes.
You know, and that is there are tests that we can do on perceived stress. So it's really
there are tests you can do on perceived stress. Oh, that's interesting.
So like I said, it depends on the person. So I can't tell from listening to a person's story necessarily whether they're feeling stress or not. But I can ask them specific questions about how they're reacting to what's happening in their life, and that will tell me about how they perceive their lives as stressful or not.
You have said that it's important that people do recognize when they're stressed and do know their signs of stress. That, you can't cope with something that if you don't recognize the fact that something is stressing you.
Right. Yep. That's very helpful.
Which would
for
make
sure.
sense.
And then what we know is that stress, long-term stress, creates an enormous amount of my mouth is not working today. Wear and tear on your body.
Yes.
And that really does. It can lead to cardiovascular disease. It can exacerbate chronic conditions like Parkinson's, diabetes, arthritis. Yeah, there's just a lot of negative effects on your body that we really encourage people. It's not just you're in a bad mood. Not sleeping is like really hard on your body. Just to say, it's important that we recognize it because it can create problems. It's not just, I'm grumpy or I'm not having a good day. It can really create problems physically as well.
Over a period of time.
Over a long time, yeah.
Yeah, these are the adrenal cortical hormones that build up. Are there some people who remain stressed pretty much all their lives, even in the midst of a relatively normal life?
Yeah, I think there are people that are kind of wired to be a little bit more that way. And I guess the other thing that I can think about when you ask that question too is that trauma in your life will create that kind of hypersensitivity. And if you're not kind of haven't processed that trauma, childhood trauma, adult trauma,
all right,
it becomes sort of part of your response. And so we see that a lot working with people in therapy, is that there is something that happened to them that created that adjustment, which just putting them on edge all the time.
All right, we certainly hear about victims of childhood sexual abuse and things of that sort, which would be an extreme form of it.
Yeah.
But haven't you also spoken in the past about the fact that if it's a severe enough trauma, that it can affect future generations?
Oh yeah, I know, that's crazy, isn't it?
It is.
That there have been studies that show that if there's a particular time in a culture's historical development where they experience a famine or a war or some other kind of, horrific thing that happens, then it actually can get translated into the DNA. I know, it's crazy.
I know, that is just astonishing.
Yeah, but it goes to the force of the impact.
Wow.
All right, well, that was very helpful.
Yeah.
Sandy, you're going to take on signs of stress, or you're going to take on ways to relieve stress.
Right. And there were probably as many ways to relieve stress as there were people. I think we all tend to come at it from our own point of view, what works for us. So one of the things that people talked about was distracting themselves from whatever it is that's causing the stress. So getting lost in a good book, getting lost in knitting, or crossword puzzles,
TV
watching
programs.
TV, computer games, something to take your mind off what the stressor is. One person said they went and played the piano, and for them that was useful. Another thing that I know a lot of folks use is yoga or meditation, and we've talked a bit about that before, and deep breathing. And Marcia, you're a firm believer, I know, in breathing.
I had never used breathing exercises in a therapeutic way, but I will confess that it got me through the first 2 months of this illness.
Good.
When sleepless nights and pain, I was in just despair, and it absolutely got me through.
Great.
Good. So that's something that, helps you relax then, and
It does. I mean, and it's immediate. Takes very little effort just to do the breathing.
and you can do it anywhere.
You can do it anywhere. Exactly.
Okay. Along with that, also, some people talk to themselves and try to talk themselves through whatever problem it is. Again, something that doesn't require any outside thing. You can do it anywhere. You may have that conversation mentally. One person responded they talked to themselves in the mirror. So it helps to talk through sometimes. Another response was to spend time or get support from friends and family. And then
one would also hope that one might, if you are stressed by something, go over to the medical center and ask for the clinical social worker.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Then there were some people who chose outside things like to take an Aleve or a Tylenol or something which would help relaxation, or have a glass of wine, eat sweets. One person responded that dessert is stress spelled backwards.
Desserts.
Yes, desserts,
Plural.
excuse me, plural, which we thought was clever.
We did.
And
We liked
ice
that.
cream is often the chosen sweet to enjoy. But yeah, sweets or other foods, sometimes people do tend to go and eat as a stress reliever. And sometimes, we realize that and we try not to do it because of the impact of eating too much. But yeah. One person said, smiling muscles relieve stress. That seemed to help them. And another person said they wish they knew a way to relieve the stress. Take a walk, especially if it's near water. Water tends to have a very smoothing effect on a lot of people. And fortunately, we have that beautiful pond that we can go to, or the creek down behind.
Yeah.
And some folks find that's helpful. Sleeping too much often is one way we realize we are stressed is we realize, oh, I've been sleeping way more than normal. Pacing the floor, praying, prioritizing tasks to be done. And sometimes if you know what the stressor is, say it's your apartment's a mess and it's driving you crazy and you really feel like it's just causing all kinds of stress in your life just to walk in there, and it's not a calm, comfortable place to be. Sometimes you just have to dig in and attack it and start cleaning it, and I think that's what they were talking about with prioritizing tasks to be done. Just, okay, if I start on this, and the goal will be ultimately to get a better, more comfortable place to be that will relieve some of the stress I'm feeling, but
I think some folks too were talking about doing to-do lists.
To-do lists, yeah.
It somehow, you feel like you have a little control if you have a to-do list.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a to-do lister.
Yes, I am as well. I am as well.
And sometimes it's even helpful if you've done something that's not on your to-do list to go back and write it on, and then you can check it off.
That's right. Or cross it off.
Yeah.
Because it gives you that feeling of accomplishment.
It absolutely does. There's a real satisfaction in that. I quite agree.
So obviously there are as many ways to relieve stress. Some work for some folks. Some, we're all different, and we tend to find what works for us and apply it in as many situations as we can.
And Kathleen, do you have anything to add to that list?
Well, I think that the main thing which I think is important is the distraction component, because when I think about your anxious mind is like going like crazy, and it's attaching itself to all of these little things that are bothering it and worrying it, and really creating more anxiety. So if you can figure out a way to distract your brain in a positive way, and it can be any of these things, then that's actually going to have the effect that you want. Is you have to sort of trick your brain from focusing on all the negative, worrisome things to something positive and soothing. And
I like that.
Yeah. So we try to do that. We try to figure out ways to do that.
Well, folks, I think that we need to close up here in a minute or so. I have found this very helpful. Sandy, do you have any final words here?
I just hope that if people are experiencing a lot of stress, that they will reach out to find a way to deal with it and not just internalize it and let it become a bigger problem than it already is. That we all deal with it in some way, I think, at some level, and so the key is to not let it become so overwhelming that it takes over our lives.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is just as simple in a way as just thinking about our lives. They have a lot of things going on in them that sometimes you don't quite know how to react to. So it's not, it's not anything more than just trying to find some help in figuring out how to adjust to your life.
Yes, particularly things that weren't anticipated, that you haven't experienced before.
Yeah, it's just life.
It is.
Exactly.
Part of life for sure.
Yeah, and I think sometimes just talking to somebody is a huge help.
Yeah, I would hope the residents have conversations, that they share, like with the surveys, but in real time share what their experiences are and how they've been coping. I think that's very helpful.
Yes, really, the residents were very forthcoming as a group, and it was extremely interesting and helpful.